Within quarter of an hour, the long, low-ceiling room sounded and looked like a battlefield. Pistol shots crashed and thundered like cannon in the enclosed space. Red muzzle blasts licked the tongues of fire through the thick black smoke that smothered the candlelight and turned the shooters into threatening shadows who lost all idea of why they were shooting or what they were even supposed to be shooting at. Zent's voice accompanied the cannonade, croaking like a raven, squalling like a falcon, howling like a wolf, and roaring like a bear. White shards of bone showered down on the yelling pistolers from the shattered skulls, and long yellow splinters flew about like shrapnel out of the gouged walls and ruined portrait frames. Several of the Bilovich ancestors' portraits were shot to pieces in the chaos, and the blood-mad Ranitsky fell into one of his murderous furies and hacked the rest of them with his sword. The terrified servants stared with bulging eyes at this wild entertainment, which looked more like a Tartar raid than anything they ever saw or imagined in this peaceful manner. The frightened dogs began to bark and howl outside, while groups of villagers ran up to the main house and clustered in the courtyard. The manor maids crowded outside the windows, flattening their noses against the fogged, frosted glass, and peered inside to see what was happening. Zent spotted them at last. He uttered such a shrill and high-pitched whistle that even Radnitsky dropped his sword and covered his ears. "Birds, gentlemen!" Zent cried out. "There are birds outside and pecking at the windows. Hey, hey, the birdies, get the birdies. Let's have a little dancing," howled the drunken voices, and the savage company poured out of the house. They were so far gone in their intoxication that even the bitter winter frost failed to sweep the fumes of wine and mead out of their streaming heads and put a damper on their mad excitement. That was a description of drunken house party gone mad, with the manor's master and men destroying his own manor at that point. Pages 33 to 34 in Volume 1 of my version of The Deluge by Henryk Sienkiewicz. Hello and welcome back to the library, and before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to introduce my guest this week, the resident historian, the White Rhino himself, my brother Jacek.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Did you enjoy that description in the front of this?
The resident historian might be giving me too much credit.
I don't know about that, but okay. That's what made you laugh this time, not the fact that they were literally smashing the
I was very curious what was happening.
Yes, that was just a drunken house party gone absolutely insane by some of the worst people in this book. But, you know, they don't live very long lives in this book, so who cares? Yeah, so as I just stated, I wanted to highlight my version of the book referring to, because today we're talking about the Deluge, Jacek. We're talking about one of the most famous books in all of Polish history, as well as one of the most famous or infamous times in Poland, period. Do you have anything you want to start with about the Deluge before we get into it? Because we are going to get into some of the historical context, obviously. We're going to talk about kind of why this was written, but not really. The easy answer is it was written because it's the most important. And then, you know, get into like where we left off from the first part of the trilogy into where we're on now.
No. I mean, I'm assuming you're just going to talk about the history real quick of the Deluge.
Sure, for about an hour. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I figured. So, I mean, I'm not much to say except I think it's important to understand just how much the previous iterations of Sienkiewicz's books. Am I saying that right? I don't have it in my face yet. His books, so the previous historical stuff kind of bleed and lead directly to the other, like the Tatar uprising and the other stuff. This is the second one, right?
Yeah, part 2 of 3 of the trilogy. Something that, you know, our dad told me when I asked him for the books from Poland, and I ended up getting all these in the United States, actually, except for the one of them, was you don't actually have to read all of them to understand one another, which is true in some ways, because what he actually writes about is very, very different topics, and we'll explain that right now.
I mean, it's important to understand what's happening in the story, because this is like as important as like I guess like maybe the Civil War or something, like or the World War II, something in like American history, like education, that the stuff that they focus on. The Deluge is one of those, like, yeah, this is something you have to know happened here. It's not like some intricate thing that you have
Well, it's complex for sure.
Well, it's intricate. Some specific part of American history that you might not learn. Like this is big on like Polish history.
It's a core tenet of
core
education.
tenet, yeah.
Okay.
I'm awake.
Yep. It's all right. It's 2:00 and I've been awake since 5:30. So thank God for having a child.
Yeah.
As always, I'm going to highlight the version of the book I'm referring to that I read. This is, The Deluge by Henryk Sienkiewicz, translated by W.S. Kunichik. Both volumes of this book were published simultaneously in 1991 by the Copernicus Society of America, which we chatted about in the first book. You can read the whole thing on Project Gutenberg if you wanted to, but that really to me is a real chore, and I feel like this being split into 2 volumes, about 1,800 pages long, I can't imagine reading it online is an enjoyable reading experience.
1,800 between the 2, so
it's 1,800 together.
Yeah.
One was 800 plus, the other one was just under 1,000. So yeah, it's crazy. Remember where we left off in the trilogy by any chance? It was the siege of Zbarach had ended due to the heroics of With Fire and Sword's main protagonist. With Fire and Sword being the first volume of the trilogy, of course. This epic scene that concludes with the celebration due to a victory in the southeastern portion of the Commonwealth, which is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and would be located right smack dab in the middle of present-day Western Ukraine, where the siege happened. The Deluge I'm referring to is a series of devastating wars and military campaigns that left the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in shambles and led directly to the downfall of the Golden Age and basically the end of this multinational state as we knew it, or as they knew it at least, and would eventually lead to its eventual eradication from the map many years later, which first, second, and third partitions of Poland occurred, right? So the first book covers this first period called the Chmielnicki Uprising, occurring from 1648 to roughly 1655 when Chmielnicki dies himself, and then the Deluge picks up from there. I will not get into the uprising. If you want to know more, listen to the first episode. As mentioned in that episode, we did on With Fire and Sword. Again, the first book only really covers the first year of the conflict that is now widely known as the Chmielnicki Uprising, and also in the broader sense, the Deluge, because historians are confusing. However, the Deluge, as we mentioned previously known, or also known in Polish, and what this book actually is called in Polish, it's called Potop, can also be dissected into multiple different parts, right? There's the Second Northern War, also known as the Swedish War, which we'll get into. There's also something called, self-explanatorily, the Polish-Russian War of 1654 to 1667. Often when the historians talk about the Deluge, they refer to something also known as the Swedish Deluge, which is part of this book, was what this book is about. This occurred in 1655 and 1666. Have I lost you yet?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
You do.
Okay.
I hope everybody else listening
You may
does.
have lost other people, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about the Swedish Deluge. That's important. Remember the word Swedish. Remember the word Deluge. Remember 1655 to 1660. That's what we're going to be talking about later. I haven't read the third book of this epic trilogy yet, and I mean it's really, truly epic. The first book in my version was about 1,100 pages long, and the second book of the trilogy was split into 2 volumes, roughly around 1,800 pages together. But something that I was told before picking up the Deluge, and I just mentioned this, is that you don't need to read both of them to understand what's going on. Sienkiewicz does an adequate enough job explaining the facts that happened in the first novel to get the plot in the second to progress without losing the reader. The only thing you need to know is that there are a few characters who come from the first novel into the second, and then from the second into the third. Not everybody continues, and realistically, not even the historical figures are the same that he bases them off. There's only 3 or 4 real figures that transcend several different novels, and most of them are fictional. However, I will achieve something similar to our listeners when I say hope is tomorrow's veneer over today's disappointment. At least that's what Evan Esser said, and that dude is quoted in a New York Times crossword puzzle legit all the time, so hopefully I don't lose you here. Any questions so far?
No, I'm assuming we're going to talk about Jan Kazimir Vasa a bunch, right?
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk about him. Unfortunately, it's later on in this script, but Jan Kazimir is, He's a figure. What I will say when comparing the first two books is that with Fire and Sword, it's a lot more approachable to the common reader. First, it is shorter, albeit 1,000 pages compared to, again, 1,800. But doubling the length of the book nearly almost means that you have to double the exposition, double the number of characters, and whatever character development that you're going to have, significantly increase plot development and explanations. All in all, the Deluge volumes 1 and 2 were almost felt like a chore towards the end of reading them for me personally, even though it was a truly brilliant accomplishment of literature, specifically Polish literature, but literature in general. And I would put them in the same league as something like War and Peace, the Brothers Karamazov, things of that nature, these epic novels that, well, the Brothers Karamazov is not an historical novel, but War and Peace, definitely around there. The Deluge's tenor between the two is also a lot darker. There's a lightheartedness in Fire and Sword that you don't get in the sequel. It also naturally continues in the same trilogy themes, like something like Star Wars, the first trilogy, or Lord of the Rings, that the first book ends on a high note after serious conflict. The second has a darker ending, though admittedly the second does have a happier ending than the previously two fictional trilogies I just mentioned. And then third, presumably has a glorious ending, but again, I don't know anything about Fire and Step. Again, that's the third book. It's also known as Pan Michał in its original translation. I can't tell you what exactly happens. And what I will do is spoil that fact that Pan Michał, as it is named after one of the main characters in this novel, in the first novel, and obviously the last novel, if keen listeners have guessed. And the third book in the trilogy takes place after the Deluge during a completely different conflict, which we will get to in due time, just not today after I read it.
I'm assuming it's the same. I'm assuming it's probably in the northeast against Russia.
Nope. No, I'm going to talk about how Russia is completely omitted from these histories for probably a really legitimate reason, because he was writing in Russian censors.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sobieski comes into play. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spoiler. Yeah, no, it's a completely different conflict.
I could go on about Jan Sobieski, but yeah, I will stop. But
I'll mention this now because I was going to mention it after we read in Fire and Step and talk about it. But if there's a funny Polish name on a bottle of vodka, that means that guy was a huge historical figure.
Yeah, Sobieski is.
There's several.
I'm trying to think of another one though.
It's not Belvedere, obviously, but like.
But that's that's palace of the summer palace of the king in Warsaw.
Is it Belvedere?
Belvedere, yeah.
Oh, jeez. Okay, I always got confused. Why is there a French name?
No, he named it. Well, he named it a French name because everyone was naming their palaces after French stuff. But yeah, no, it's.
Well, that's illuminating.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there you go. There's other ones out there too. But.
Oh yeah. I don't know if you're gonna go into it, but the Winter Palace is near the Vistula. It's where Swedish people, when they go down to Warsaw in this book, they ransack a palace by the river, and that palace was the headquarters of the University of Warsaw, where, or at least the campus I went to school at, which is pretty interesting.
Well, that is interesting because we do touch upon that, but I didn't realize that was such a direct connection right there. It's later. It's like almost a footnote in this. But as I said, when I was talking about the tenor of this book, The Deluge, there's a lot of soul searching within characters, a lot of darkness found within the hearts of these complicated figures that we will discuss. And because of this, the actions taken by fictional and historical characters, The Deluge didn't have the same playfulness nor comic relief as with Fire and Sword. I personally am glad to have read these in order. It made doing basic research on historical events a lot easier and almost entirely unnecessary at times. One reason why you don't fully need to read the first book to understand the second is because 7 or 8 years pass between the ending of the first and the beginning of the second. And those 7 and 8 years might have as well been an eternity for the people living in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the time. I know history keeps on happening whenever you like it or not, but I can't help to compare modern times to the later half of the 17th century, and that there must have been something of like so frequently things were changing that so many people's lives that it must have felt like whiplash, and we didn't even have the horrors of war within our nation's borders to fret over. And the subsequent famines that war caused. Disease, however, that we have some knowledge about because we're bringing it back, baby. We're bringing it back. That's what I got to say. Though a smaller percentage would die in real life right now than they would die back in the den because clean drinking water and sewage disposal is still not a hot topic issue. Anything to say?
No.
No, not at all.
Sorry.
No way. So yeah, a freaking lot happens within those 8 years. We're going to do our diggity dog darnest to summarize what occurs. And here it is. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is at war, and every neighboring nation partakes in some way.
Oh.
That's the podcast.
Cool.
Yeah, any questions?
No.
Woo, woo, it's the sound of the police outside. Who got arrested? Yeah, so pretty much every protagonist who didn't die in the first book is said to have fought in the Chmielnicki uprising for most of its duration. Of course, the uprising continues throughout this period and doesn't even end during the Deluge. In fact, references are made from time to time stating that the Ruthenians and the Cossacks are threatening rebellion consistently, and that Chmielnicki, though mostly subdued, is still very much a threat. For a significant portion of this book, specifically the earlier parts and towards the end of the book, it takes place in the Lithuanian portion of the Commonwealth. So think about Lithuania in general, where we're at. So near the Baltic Sea, as opposed to where modern-day Ukraine is, just comparing the two books. This area is still very much in the heart of the modern-day Lithuanian country. Specifically, most of this book takes place in a historical region known as Lauda, I believe. Lauda is how it is in English. I don't know if Lauda would be in Polish, but as it is referenced in the books, it's no longer referred to this in the present day, as I mentioned, but it is basically right in the center of modern-day Lithuania. Most of the characters, specifically the fictional characters, are said to be from here, who aren't the recurring ones. So all the additional characters, with the exception of the people from Greater Poland that we'll talk about. No, Krakow isn't part of Greater Poland, is it? No.
No, Lesser Poland.
That's Lesser Poland.
Poznań.
Poznań is Greater Poland. Never mind. Part of Lesser Poland. Thanks for correcting me. And much of the fighting in the book actually occurs in this area, again, except around Lesser Poland. Częstochowa, Lesser Poland too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. This is a little bit off topic, but the most famous poet and Nobel-laureate of the modern age is from this area. Is called Czesław Miłosz, is from this region of the world. And to show how ethnically diverse this area was before WW II, Czesław never considered himself a Lithuanian because he wasn't. He was a Polish person, immigrated to America, wrote mostly all of his poetry entirely in Polish, was born a subject of the Russian Empire, spoke obviously Polish, Lithuanian, Russian, French, English, and Hebrew. And honestly, one of these days, I can't wait to cover Czesław Miłosz. He's one of my favorite poets of all time. He has a crazy tale. Have you heard of Czesław Miłosz?
Heard of him? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Dad met him, right? Several times, or at least once. Yeah,
I would believe it, yeah.
Well, yeah.
He never told me about it, but yeah.
I think he did. I think he told me once. I digress. Something we can touch upon in this region of the country, along with basically the entire eastern border of the Commonwealth, is throughout the book and basically most of its existence, it's being attacked by Russians, a.k.a.'d sometimes as the Muscovites in this book. In the books, they are portrayed as a group of roving bandits, basically, mostly disorganized and participating in what we refer to as asymmetrical warfare, crossing over the border and ransacking a castle here, robbing a peasant there, then raping everybody in between. And that's kind of true to some extent in real life, but there's a lot more to it. By the beginning of the book, the Russian Empire had already invaded Poland and had taken control of the cities like Smolensk, which is now an administrative center of Smolensk Oblast and firmly within Western Russia. And many of the cities that are on the eastern border near what is Belarus today. This is very important note because the lead character of the book is originally from this area and his homelands have been overtaken by the Russians. He, by the good grace of God and by, his stubbornness, is also a Polish-Lithuanian noble, and we will touch on him when we introduce new characters later. In real life, Russia is very much full-on in war with the Commonwealth. We will, again, do some of the historical important events that are in the book, but I find that Sienkiewicz does not really talk about the Russian Empire much at all. It's really just passing references. Nor does he really touch about it in the first book of the trilogy. During that episode, I posited that he did this because he knew his audience, of whom included the Russian censors. I still think, and this is my own personal beliefs, that he did not want to piss off Russia. Fair enough, because that meant he would have probably died. One of those,
or just not been published. I mean, well, if it was a diatribe attacking Russia, sure. But if it was something like a historical mention, then I don't know. I'm getting into.
Yeah, I'm
trying to. I'm defending the Okhrana right now, and I don't want to do that. But yeah, he probably just wouldn't have ever had anything published.
True. This was predates, the Stalinist area of suicide by 2 bullets to the back of the head, right?
Yeah.
Another word I would use for the Russians are colonizers, even though colonies weren't really like a thing back in the day. We talked about the partitions to Poland. We're not going to get into that at this point.
I mean, you stated that they call them the Muscovites, and I think a lot of historians still do until right around this time. Actually, it was a transition because the Principality of Moscow or Grand Principality of Moscow wasn't the Russian Empire under the Tsar until Ivan the Terrible, who I think just died in this story. Something like that. Yes. Not in the story, but in the historical framework. So people were still calling them Muscovites, and it's not too much of a stretch to keep calling them that. Much smaller Russia. Still massive kingdom, but still much smaller than it is now.
All right, so Jacek, what was actually happening between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Tsardom of Russia at this point to the east?
Well, the Tsardom was kind of growing in power, but I think 30 years earlier was the Trouble, or it's something like the Trouble or the Troubling Time. I'm not saying it correctly. A lot of shitty things were happening in Russia. Boyar and peasant uprisings, Ivan the Terrible trying to hold power through horrific violence, and eventually Poland took over Moscow. And I think that was like 30 years earlier, maybe a little later. But yeah, basically Poland was pushing out against Moscow's at Moscow's expense. I think at some point Moscow was able to kind of hold themselves together under the soon-to-be founded Romanov dynasty. They try to start the Great Northern War against the Swedes very soon that you'll probably bring up.
No, because the Second Great Northern War is basically what we're going to talk about. There's so much war. Yeah. I had to narrow it down.
Yeah, and they don't win that, but neither does Poland, which leaves to a much weaker Poland. Poland basically gets crushed by the Swedes, and I think that's about it. They're not necessarily antagonistic towards each other, though they're not friends in any, they're not actively trying to kill each other. They're rivals, and they're willing to work together. They don't like each other, but they're not mortal enemies, really. They're willing to take each other's land at any point. So
the mortal enemies happen later, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Bringing it back towards the Khmelnytsky uprising, the Cossacks were looking for an ally to aid their struggle of autonomy from the Polish-Lithuanian government, right? There was at least one treaty signed that basically banned all Polish officials as well as Ruthenians and Jews from the voivodeships that constituted, around this uprising. Because remember, this is Eastern Europe. Of course, there's anti-Semitism involved. I'm going to remove the word Eastern. This is just Europe. But the treaty wasn't something that Catholic bishops in Poland found very super cool. So in 1654, Khmelnytsky met with Tsar Alexis in the town of Pereyaslav is what I'm going for Russia's support. An oath of allegiance was signed to the Tsar in exchange for Russia taking the side of the Cossacks. This is called the Pereyaslav Agreement. Very creative, right? And because of this, to this day, Russian historians argue that this was an acceptance of Tsar's authority, complete authority, and thereby making them part of the Tsardom because, of course, they did. There isn't any countless historical examples of Russian leaders getting foreign powers to sign agreements and then co-opting them to join them either under their empire or become a Soviet satellite state or force them under the sphere of influence. It certainly isn't happening today in places like Georgia, the country, not the state. Though that would be a fun concept to think of, that the Georgian government got tricked into signing something that now recognizes them as part of the Russian Federation. They probably would be able to pull that off, honestly. Not to give Putin some ideas, holy shit. You would never happenly, obviously, or solely because, the lack of hockey players and teams of Georgia is my guess, honestly, because the Thrashers are no longer there anymore. Go Jets. I digress. Whereas Ukrainians stressed in their own autonomy, which basically helped them create the predecessor of modern-day Ukraine today. However, we're dealing with Russia and Ukraine. Guess what happens? So after the agreement that it was pretty much inevitable for Russia to invade Poland in help of the Cossacks. This started the Polish-Russia War of 1654 to 1667. Very creative again, and lasted longer than even the war that this book is based off of. This war was only ended after the Truce of Androzovo was signed in 1667, where Russia gained a lot of land in what is modern-day Ukraine, such as Kiev, and also the city of Smolensk, and more land here and there and everywhere smattered. They also signed a 13-and-a-half-year truce to not fight each other, and then to go fight the common enemy that they had, the Ottomans. And I know it sounds like an odd thing to agree to not fight for 13 and a half years, but like Poland and Sweden will sign a truce for a determined amount of time that Sweden just ignores at one point, because why would you argue to not fight for a certain amount of time if that just means you're going to fight again?
Yeah, but that was like the common practice, at least in northeastern Europe.
It's like, I kept thinking, it's like, what the hell is that half doing? Like, well, it's really, really pulling its own weight. And I go, oh, because it was like the truce happened in February, and that means if it's a half a year afterwards, they don't fight for the entirety of the summer.
You can't fight.
Then you don't fight again for the winter.
You have a year off, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there you go. Unless you're bold enough to fight in the middle of the winter. I just think it's an important note that while everything that is occurring in this book that we're going to talk about, there are at least two other major conflicts separate from what we refer to as the Swedish Deluge, one of them being the Khmelnytsky uprising that does end during it, and the other one is this Russian-Polish war that, again, is just occurring. Any questions so far?
No.
But we will talk about the Swedish Deluge. We must get back in time, and let's start making odd time travel noises for this. So we need to talk about the 30 Years' War and the place Sweden has in the history because of it. Because many people in the U.S. of motherfucking A don't think of Sweden and the Swedish crown when they think of imperial powers conquering their neighbors. Vikings excluded, but those are kind of a different group of people for all intensive purposes, right? You don't talk about the Romans and, say, the Italians and you destroyed Carthage, right? The 30 Years' War was a fucking shit show of a war that occurred between 1618 and 1648. 30 years. That saw some of the places like modern-day northern Germany basically lose half of the entire population due to battle, famine, and or disease. 4.5 to 6 million people died during this conflict. And to sum up why the conflict occurred in one word and to be annoyingly reductive as possible, is because of religion. Primarily between Protestantism versus Catholicism, and a long-standing beef of neighboring countries and monarchs had due to histories, their own long-founded histories, and their own deeply sought religious beliefs. That right there summarized Central European conflicts for that era. History buffs get pissed off.
Yeah, it was the worst conflict maybe in world history up to that point. I'm sure I'm missing something in like
China.
Yeah. But or
even
even
4.5 to 6 million people is like China numbers when it comes down to like the number of people killed.
Mongol numbers.
Mongol numbers, yeah.
Yeah, in the Middle East or something like but in so isolated in such a small area. It was horrific.
Yeah, and it all started with the defenestration of Prague, right? We're not getting into that. I just love the word defenestration and the fact that there's a word for throwing somebody out the window. Like, there's a word in English to throw somebody out a window.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's important in the scope of this podcast episode and the history of the Deluge is that outside of the conflict called the 30 Years' War was the sentiment of the characters that were fighting, in the Polish people were fighting these evil Protestants, and that they were truly a backwards heathen people for not only their war crimes that they were committing, but also because of their Protestant beliefs. During the time in the early 17th century that was also occurring around now, in northern central Europe, there was also this thing called the Polish-Swedish Wars of 1600 to 1611, 1617 to 1618, 1621 to 1625, and 1626 to 1629. And just for historical accuracy, many historians just consider this just the Polish-Swedish War in separate parts. Whatever. To simplify this conflict, Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden invaded Poland with the specific intention to capture Gdańsk. He didn't, and Poland eventually got their holdings back, but they did give Sweden 2/3 of all proceeds that came from the port of Gdańsk, which is very important in this area when you're coming to think of the Baltic Sea, at the end of the Wisła or the Vistula in English. This gave Poland peace for the time being and allowed the Swedes to refocus their efforts on the 30 Years' War. The ceasefire was also set to expire after 6 years, but it was extended when the two nations signed the Treaty of Sturmsdorf, which extended the truce for another 26 and a half year. And again, that half year really throwing its weight around. This treaty was not mentioned by name in the book, but it is mentioned several times by characters because they kept saying that the Sweden doesn't want to declare war to the Commonwealth for like another 7 years because that's what they say. Because 7 years in this book in the 1800 pages, they say it several times, what the hell is this guy doing? So it came to a total shock when Charles X Gustav, or when you read it online, it's Charles X Gustav, or Charlie XCX is what I'm going to call him, King of Sweden, invades Poland again, breaking the truce. And here we have one of the main antagonists of the book, and with one of the shortest amount of screen time, realistically, this Charlie XCX fellow. You know who Charlie XCX is?
Is a singer person, right?
Yeah, the Brat album. Yes. Yeah. Now, Charlie X, another confusing fact is that he's the fourth king of Sweden named Charles, so I think it's okay to call him Charlie XCX. He's not the 10th. They skipped a few there. And his army under Arvid, I think it's Wittenberg, who plays a huge role in this book, first occupies Polish Livonia, which is modern-day Lithuania and Belarus, and then goes to a region called Greater Poland.
Sorry.
Go for it.
It would be Arfin Wittenberg.
Arvid.
So the V in German sounds like an F.
Oh, it is German. Yeah, that's right. He's Prussian.
Wittenberg is, yeah.
Arvid then goes to Greater Poland, northerly to the city of Poznań, where, that's where Mom's from, right? Her side of the family. Here, Henryk Sienkiewicz remember, this is the author we're talking about, all right? So, there's a lot of names, but we're talking about Henryk Sienkiewicz. He claims that Greater Poland hadn't been attacked by a foreign army since the 14th century, when the Teutonic Knights were fucking around in this area and simply being weird and doing their ritualistic ship and money grabs. The Szlachta, or the royalty as it is known in Poland, in this region basically capitulates without any resistance to Wittenberg's army, which happens in real life in basically the same way. And Sienkiewicz blames the knights in this area, so the Polish knights, for never having to fight or a real war, and their lack of war experience made them soft. The way that these men these days are not real men, particularly in the past, they don't smoke cigarettes, they don't have 3 cocktail lunches, they don't abuse their ladies of the evening, those kind of things. A good portion of this book occurs in Greater Poland at a certain point, and then Lesser Point and even more. But we will get to that Lesser Poland shortly when we talk about a siege, because of course we do. We're talking about sieges. Most of these nobles all throughout Poland swear fealty to Charlie XCX and her Brat album after she dropped it. And well, they find out you shouldn't swear fealty to somebody who calls you a brat or calls themselves a brat, because of course you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that Charles X and
we're going to talk about that shortly. Yes.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking. What I do want to bring up is King Jan Kazimierz Wasa, the Polish king, because he has to flee Warsaw shortly after very little resistance. Now, we mentioned in the first episode that the Polish kings are elected, albeit they were almost always chosen from some noble family. King Jan II was actually the son of a Polish king. His heritage, however, if you're going to believe this, is Swedish, from the Vasa dynasty.
Yeah.
His uncle was Gustavus Adolphus, the guy who invaded Poland in the 17th century. His father and Gustavus they were first cousins. Meanwhile, his mother was Anne of Austria. He was born in Krakow, which tied him to the land by birth, but his heritage doesn't really necessarily tie him to the Polish people. So, yeah, Jan Kazimierz is second cousins to Charlie XCX.
Yeah, and he has a claim to the throne, which he kind of wanted to be the king. I mean, he wanted to be the king of Sweden too. But I think the previous king, he left, right? He left his throne, and that's how Jan Kazimierz became king of Poland. Am I wrong?
No, he was elected.
I know, but he was elected after some guy who came to Poland to become king was elected, and then decided he didn't want to do this. He wanted to be a king of Sweden. I think it might have been Jan Kazimier's cousin or something, and then he left the throne, and that's how Jan Kazimierz. I don't know. I might be wrong. You just cut that part out. So.
Yeah, I think the guy died because we talked about it in the first episode, but I forget now. Even at the time of his election, he wasn't the most popular person for every member of the voting class. For one thing, the Chmielnicki uprising was a long conflict that had no end in sight at this point. And as a leader of the nation, well, it doesn't reflect on you when you have this conflict going on, this type of conflict. Another thing is that he declared that he was the rightful king of Sweden too, right? That didn't help Poland in the whole not getting invaded business. He also despised the culture of the nobility, which was called Sarmatism, which was a culture identity within the Commonwealth's nobility that shared a unifying belief that the people of the Commonwealth descended from Iranian Sarmatians that came up to the Polish lands around the 6th century AD or CE. Yeah, he wasn't a huge fan of that. And this culture actually is not that incorrect in regards to how the first Slavs became to be. They were a group of the people who migrated from what is modern day Iran right now. Lastly, he believed in absolute monarchy, specifically the Austrian type of absolute monarchy. No, not the Austrian School of Economics. We believe that in this country, and look how far we've gotten. And based on what he spoke during the first episode, Us Two Together, the noble class in Poland, regardless if they were extremely wealthy or dirt poor, had a general sense of equal rights amongst one another, and they definitely did not want to see their powers deteriorate. You might be asking yourself then, why would the nobles no longer follow a Swedish monarch they fear, who's technically Polish, who may possibly take away their powers, and then choose somebody who certainly will take away, who's a foreign Swedish monarch, take away all their statuses? Well, because nobility is a stupid institution filled with stupid people.
It's not good, especially in Poland. They believe themselves to be the embodiment of what Poland was. They're very haughty people who refuse to share any power, even though it would have made sure they didn't have Russian overlords in the future or Swedish overlords. They just didn't care. They believed they were themselves Poland in themselves. A very toxic mentality, especially if you were an average Polish person just living there, having to fight for some asshole who tended to own the land that you lived your entire life on.
Henryk touches upon how the Schlata, or the noble voting class, who owns these lands, reacted several times. But here's one of the descriptions of one of the minor antagonists we won't really get into, a Czech soldier during the siege of Jasna Góra, which we definitely have to get into, and how he describes what happens with the voting class. Quote, "Your Grace, is there a people in this world more disorderly, anarchic, and self-absorbed than this one? Is there a country, another one, where everybody thinks only of himself? Who rules here? Not the king, because his subjects don't allow him to, but Parliament, because they break it up at will. Just look at them, sir. They don't have armies because they won't pay taxes. There's no respect for authority among them because they see discipline and obedience as an abridgment of their private freedoms. There is no justice because there's no way to enforce the verdicts, and everybody tramples on court decrees with impunity if he feels himself strong enough to do it. They have neither faith nor loyalty because they've turned their backs on the rightful king, nor is there any love for their own country among them since they turned it over to the Swedes. And for what? What did the Swedes have to give them in return? No more than a promise that they'll be allowed to live in their old self-serving anarchy." This is from the first volume, pages 749, 750, right before the siege happens. I mean, it sums it up. This is a pretty harsh sentiment, but the point Sienkiewicz is making here is that the system of government with the liberum veto, which we talk about in the first book, was one of the reasons why the country crumbled, and the nobles decided to turn their back on an unpopular king for themselves with the false premise of keeping their status, because he wasn't unpopular to a lot of people who weren't nobles.
I would classify it as the primary reason.
Yes, because I mean, at least this book, what it tells me and what we can find in history is the peasant classes and the Catholics, the hardcore staunch Catholics, fucking loved Jan Kazimierz because, I mean, Poland would have been eradicated beforehand. At least that's how Henryk Sienkiewicz portrays the peasant classes. And the Górale, too. We'll talk about the Górals. It's pretty fun, actually.
Yeah. I mean, Jan Kazimierz finds himself in he puts himself in such a shitty situation and tries to get him, and mostly gets himself out. But yeah, I don't know. Don't try not to give him any credit. He was not good.
He was not a great king.
A smarter person would have worked with the levers that he had. Levers of power, instead of just trying to a smarter ruler would have adopted better to the political climate in Poland with the nobility, and he was just trying to force a system that was not conducive to like centralized government, I guess. So he wasn't very adaptable, I would say.
No, he wanted things his way. You can't do that when you're
king of Poland.
A bunch of people who believe they have as much power as you. So, Jacek, what did the Swedes do when they invaded Poland?
They went down the Vistula River.
Well, this was more of a general question. The Swedes, like basically all foreign invaders, pillaged the land they conquered, right?
Yeah.
They did everything in their power to strip Poland of all its wealth in real life, this including the wealth of nobles who capitulated to them. They may have gotten slightly better treatment than the nobles who resisted, but that's marginal. Like I previously mentioned, we will talk about one battle in particular, though that was a pivotal moment in the novel and real life, but we really don't have time to delve into any other moments or battles at this point. What I will say about the battles is that there are more battles in this novel than in the first, and as well as battles that aren't just sieges. Those sieges do play a huge role in general because that's just the type of warfare that occurred at this point. Overall, there's a lot more violence in this book. This book does have a darker tone, like I said, than its predecessor. And I think that largely has to do with the main protagonist, somebody who goes into several spiritual and personal journeys, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's put a bow on what historians refer to as the Deluge. The Treaty of Oliva was signed in 1660. Poland had to give up much of Livonia, which included the city of Riga, which is the capital of modern-day Latvia today. They would get it back after an armistice of Andrusova with the Russians again, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Swedes agreed to freedom of trade in the Baltic, and they left Poland devastated. I mean, devastated. One historian said that the Swedes stole everything that they captured and can be transported, and even literally taking things nailed to the ground. Things like stairs, chimneys, sculptures, doors, gates, literally floors. They thoroughly pillaged the state records in both Poland and Lithuania. They stole basically everything from the Royal Library in Warsaw, which was where you studied, as well as from libraries of Torun, Poznań, Malbork, Gniezno, Lublin, Radom, Krakow, Vilnius, and Bydgoszcz, just to name a few. Castles were razed to the ground, and everything inside of it was looted. Almost all of the loot still exists to this day, actually. Like, quite a lot of it is preserved and found in Sweden in their museums at this point. Jesus. Yeah, so, like, remember that whenever people talk about the British Museum, about what they have?
Yeah, the Swedish Museum is just as bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's one of those things when I was reading about this, it's like, is it fucked up? Yeah, it is fucked up, but, like, that's the whole concept of conquest, right? That you steal everything. I don't agree with it, but, like, I don't know.
I mean, what's the difference? Yeah.
What's the difference between
the Elgin marbles?
Yeah, or Napoleon stealing so much Italian art.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the Mona Lisa is in Paris, not in, was it Genoa or where, I don't actually know where the Vinci was.
Florence.
Was it Florence? Sorry.
Florence, Rome, Venice. He was in a bunch of different places.
Okay, so.
Thanks, Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, thank you, Assassin's Creed. At least it's, I mean, again.
I also, yeah.
So who won this war, right? The Deluge, right? In real life, some Swedish historians claim that Swedes won. Some Polish historians, and honestly, outside of Poland, claims that Poland won. Some claim nobody won. I'm inclined to pure bias reasons, saying that it was a Pyrrhic victory for the Poles, though there was a loss of about 25% of the population in some of the areas where the war was the worst. And as I mentioned in the first podcast of this episode of this trilogy, it also resulted with the end of the golden era for the Commonwealth that led to the inevitable demise and the eradication of the nation off the map for 123 years. Anything before we go into something else? No?
No.
Yeah, it's a sad note to continue. But the siege of Jasna Góra. Have you ever been to Jasna Góra?
Yeah, we went together.
Yeah,
I've been a couple
really
times.
Little. Yeah. You went to a couple times. I only went once. Let's pivot to one of the most important events that happened during the Deluge and arguably in all of Polish history. Let's talk about Jasna Góra. For those who are not familiar with Poland, like at all, like if you have absolutely no idea what Poland's about and you're listening to this and you're completely lost, let's say it's a predominantly Roman Catholic nation, like over 90% today. It's far more predominant today than it ever has been, except for actually losing some Catholic followers. It's probably getting more atheist.
It's slowly becoming more atheist, but
but still, I think it's over 90% to this day.
It's lapsed Catholics who will still consider themselves to be Catholics.
Yeah, it's not like how it was during communism, but the ramification of World War II and the Holocaust, it used to be a lot less so before then, right? We don't need to explain what happened there. But even the Roman Catholicism was a religion of both the nobles and the peasant classes, pretty much almost exclusively, right? Even if there were a lot of Jewish people around and Armenians who had different religions. Like, if you were a Polish person, you consider yourself Polish and not consider yourself Jewish, or you consider yourself German or Armenian, because there are plenty of those subjects within the empire. You were Catholic. With this, there is a fair amount of religious symbols, none as important as Obraz Matki Bożej w Częstochowskie. In English, this portrait is just translated to the portrait of the Black Madonna, which is a portrait of Mother Mary and her child, the 8-pound, 6-ounce sweet baby Jesus. And you want to know why it's called the Black Madonna, Jacek?
It's because she's black.
Because she's black in the portrait. That's right.
Yeah.
Because, the Poles were the few Europeans who understood that she was from Palestine.
I think it wasn't it? I can't remember what the painting was. Wasn't it an Italian painting based on Byzantine art, or
It's also, there's a lot of the reasons why it was painted black, including like the paint itself was like what they had or something like that.
Yeah.
It was just, yeah. I just always make that joke, even though there's plenty of Polish paintings of Jesus that make him like blonde hair, blue eyed. But
yeah,
it's,
yeah. I mean, when you make the divine look like you, that does make sense.
yes.
People do that all over the world.
Yeah, totally.
But
There's a reason why Rastafarian Jesus exists, right?
yeah, but there is a. I feel like Polish people understood he wasn't blonde hair, blue eyed. Like you just wanted the deity to look like you because you want to identify yourself with it, whatever. But yeah,
Made in the image and likeness of everybody, right?
though I'm sure there are a lot of idiots who still think that he's blonde hair, blue eyed in Poland. But whatever.
Well,
Like
I mean,
in-
there's
like
far
in
more
here.
in this country than
Yeah.
in Poland, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, that's fair.
I saw something like, this is totally random, but there was a church that had like this like 3D, like almost, it looked, it's a plastic sculpture, I think, but it looked like it was something that was 3D painted, and it looks like it was a baby Jesus, and it looks like Phil Collins. And it just kept popping up, and I kept laughing, and I'm like, that's a fail, guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they had old. Did it look like actual baby Jesus, or was it old man baby Jesus? I can't.
It was an old man, but it was a baby. It looked like Phil Collins with like, the hair and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah, that was. Well, no, I'm thinking of the painting of Our Lady of Częstochowa.
No, that's a definite baby.
That's an actual baby.
I looked at it when I was
Yeah.
writing this. I'm like,
it
oh
was
yeah,
it was a Byzantine and later Italian convention to make baby Jesus old, look like an old man.
this one definitely wasn't.
Yeah, which is
No beard.
very interesting. Well, no, they didn't have a beard. He just had like a weirdly old face.
Oh.
I know this one isn't. But no, there was an actual convention to do that because it was some theological thing that like Jesus had to look like an adult because he couldn't have never had the mentality of a human being, I guess, something of that nature. Like he had to have the divine mentality his entire life. So they would draw him kind of looking like an older man. It's very interesting. Sorry, I went into Byzantine art.
cultures, yeah.
But yeah.
Coming back into the script, I'm just going to say it really is difficult to overstate the cultural and religious importance this painting has in Poland to this day, especially back then. But, we'll talk about one of the reasons why it is now important to this day historically. I remember, we went there as a kid. You probably went to Częstochowa.
I went with Mom. And
When you were a little older too as
Yeah.
well. I remember when we went there, and like I just remember how many the word I can use is pilgrims, but tourists, because it's a religious tourist site. How many people go to Częstochowa?
You can say
nowadays?
pilgrims in this specific.
Yeah, it's
it is
definitely a pilgrimage.
Yeah.
But it's huge. It's a massive
Oh,
important thing.
yeah. The hill itself is massive.
Yeah, I remember being exhausted by walking it too. Poland was basically entirely conquered by Swedes and Russia at the point of the siege, right? But in the southwest part of the country, there was one hill that housed a monastery that was not ransacked completely. That was Jasna Góra, which in English is just literally translated to Bright Hill. The Swedes, not wanting to waste a good opportunity to rape, pillage, and plunder, laid siege on this monastery. But it was much more difficult than they thought. The small force, consisting mostly of monks and a few soldiers, held off for months. The prior of the monastery, a guy named Augustin Kordecki, is one of the coolest people in this book, and he is portrayed as this witty leader who prays over the defenders and makes decisions based off God's will, which it's his intelligence. He understands what needs to be happened, but he says it's God's will. His wit was probably true in real life, but it's also offered to, I need to just say that he offered to recognize Charlie XCX as the Brat King while hoping to get aid from Jan Kazimierz, the King of Poland, at any point before that, right? Like he was willing to do that, but under his own circumstances, not Charlie XCX's. At this point, Jan was exiled somewhere in Silesia, in the mountains, and in the book he isn't even in the Commonwealth at all. In the book he is on the Bohemian side, or the Czech side of Silesia, because Silesia isn't Bohemian, right? I think in real life he was in the far outskirts of the actual territory, but it doesn't really matter. After months of bombardment, the siege, an epic battle, both in real life and the book, Jasna Góra somehow survived and was the only stronghold in Poland that did not fall to the Swedes. At this point, there are plenty of Polish soldiers who were conscripted by the Swedish army, forced by sword point to fight for that army under nobles who turned co. Them being Catholics and thereby insanely superstitious, eventually came to the conclusion that the failed siege was a sign from God that King Jan Kazimir was their true rightful king, with the image of the Black Madonna being the savior of the monastery. Polish forces began to amass with recruits, and it became a rallying cry to fight against the Swedes, and a turning point in the novel itself.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was a turning point. I mean, may have been a little overplayed as a turning point a little bit, but it definitely wasn't a good morale boost. They were, I don't know if the book gets into it, but people were not happy about the Protestants in charge of...
Oh, no.
Yeah.
They were not happy.
A lot of... Are you going to talk about the guerrilla warfare, I guess? Or
No.
No. Yeah, so there was a lot of... Guerrilla warfare might make it seem a little more...
That's too modern, but yeah. It's
organized, yeah. Because, guerrilla warfare wasn't invented for about 30 years. I don't know. During the Peninsular War in Spain. I'm not going to digress on that. But yeah, a lot of uprisings and common acts of violence
by the peasants
specifically.
Yeah.
Peasant uprisings against they did not like I think they're Lutheran. They weren't Calvinist. Were they Calvinists?
They were Calvinists, a lot of them.
Yeah.
No, and Lutheran. They were a whole bunch of things.
The Swedes, yeah.
Yeah, there was... I didn't touch upon it because I didn't want it to get into... there were so many characters and I couldn't get into all of them, but there was like a Scottish general who was part
Calvinist,
of... Yeah, he was Calvinist. I mean, there was definitely Lutherans. I think the Swedes are mostly Lutherans at this point. Yeah.
I was just thinking, like, if there were Calvinists, it would be a huge blow to lose a battle, ideologically, I guess, because you would say that God was no longer on your side, basically.
Very, very Stannis Baratheon of you, right?
Yeah.
Bringing it all back. Again, like, it's really hard to overstate how much superstitious beliefs of peasants, Catholic peasants, come into play after this battle. Now, again, there are many other battles. Can't get into them. Let's end this podcast with a list of characters like we often do, starting with an update on the characters that occur in this book and the previous one that continue. Any questions before we go into this?
I have a correction.
Sure.
Belvedere Palace isn't the Summer Palace in Warsaw. It was just a palace that existed that I think at some point was a presidential palace. I don't know, but right now it's not. Just a quick correction. But yeah, Belvedere Palace does exist in Warsaw. It just was like one of the palaces they owned in the city. It wasn't their residence. It is, I think, Piłsudski lived there for a bit when he was president of Poland or something. So, I don't know. It's famous for that reason, but...
Let's talk Jan Skrzycki, right? Remember him? He was the main character, savior of the siege of Zabrach. Well, he and his wife, yes, I spoiled it for you. I spoiled that ending, had a handful of happy kids. He becomes a loyal soldier for the Polish army, but he doesn't really play a huge role in this book at all. He's more of a side character. He's there for many of the battles, excluding the siege of Jasna Góra, of course. From my understanding, his role as a main character in the trilogy is completely over. He just kind of is there, which, cool, whatever. Good for him, right? You need to have some sort of consistency throughout these books. Somebody who does play a huge role and a big, major character from the previous one and this one is Michał Wolodyjowski. Remember the little knight who was a great, great knight? Remember that one, Jacek? Well, he spent the last 7-odd years fighting against Khmelnytsky in his uprising in the book, and you thought he was a great warrior before then. Well, he sharpened his skills. He's a leader amongst the men, and people really respect his fighting abilities and bravery. However, he's missing something, and that thing is called love. When he isn't thinking of battle, he is thinking of how he can find himself a good girl and how he's really bad at that. He's just completely consistently unlucky when it comes down to women, and he fancies either getting married to somebody who doesn't really love him, who's devoted to another person, or another person who just ends up in a nunnery or dying, or a combination of those. This is a long-standing theme in this book. He's also got this strange relationship with one of the lead fictional characters, who we'll chat about shortly, specifically about a girl. But, Michał definitely is one of those characters that develop between those two books, who realistically wouldn't be... The book wouldn't progress in the same way if it wasn't for him. Otherwise, remember Zagloba? Remember the fat dude? I love this guy. Or at least I loved him in the first book. Pan Jan Zagloba, the fat, bald, half-blind knight, and the foil of most foils. Zagloba is seen in this book first living with Sciatuski and his family. Jan Sciatuski's kids call him grandfather for some reason. Because he's that kind of old and fat. He believes his fighting days are done, but that's not so.
I mean, if they're probably calling him Jacek, which is also can be considered as a insult. But yeah,
well, it's an honorific in a weird way. But I would have guessed Vujek or uncle, but no, he's calling him Jacek.
Yeah, I mean, you can use it insulting. You can insultingly or kindly, like you can call an older guy grandpa in an insulting way, I guess. But yeah. It's basically the same way.
Yeah. Well, Jan Zagloba was a humorous character in the first book, full of tall tales, straight up lying about his actions and his importance in certain events, straight up lying right to the people who were there who performed those actions literally hours ago. In the first book, this was kind of funny to me. However, it becomes incredibly insufferable by the second book. His stolen valor occurs right in front of Michał Wojciechowski several times, more often than it doesn't actually. He steals Michał's glory right in front of him, right in the higher commanders, right? For this reason, he even gets awarded the head hetman temporarily, while the real hetman of the army needs to come, where it really should have just pissed off Michał entirely, which it does. It pisses him off. It should have been Michał because of the actions that he did. However, for whatever reason, because all he had to do was basically find enough goods like food and wine to make the army happy. He didn't actually need to lead the army into battle. He does a great job. And again, this doesn't make Michał pretty happy at all. It is a fictional character. It doesn't really happen in real life. And Michał holds his tongue in front of the people because he's a noble knight. But one thing that I can say that differentiates between the two books is that there's clearly strong character development between these two characters, whereas in the first one, they're more or less the same character, a bit one-dimensional from the first page to the last, and I don't think that's the case anymore. So those are the ones that are recurring characters. Any questions right now?
No.
So no character develops more than the new character in this book. The head, I'm going to say protagonist, but he's complicated. Andrzej Kmita. It's Kmita in my book, K-M-I-T-A, so I'm going to call him Kmita in my book. But in the original version, it's Kmicic, for whatever reason, or Kmicic. Kmita, as I would call it, because it's just easier, because I can't bring myself calling him Kmicic because I didn't read this 1,800-page book with that name in mind. Kmita is a character I've been referring to basically all this time. He's the fearless warrior who, in the beginning of this book and in the beginning of this podcast, chooses the worst of the scoundrels as his war council. Remember that wild party scene I started off this episode with? That's him and his men. He also falls in love with the person who basically has to marry him for whatever weird reason. Her father tells her in his will when he dies that she basically has to either marry Kmita or go to a convent. Her name is Alexandra Bilovich, which is the Bilovich castle that he destroys. And she follows this to a T regardless of how many suitors, Volodymyrsky being one of them, tries to persuade her otherwise. It's really weird. It's a very weird fucking thing. Well, Kmita dishonors himself numerous times. First by these crazy drunken parties, then when his friends were murdered by the local townsfolk for basically raping the local peasantry. Sorry, that's a gross spoiler, and yeah, I'm using the word rape literally here. He retaliates by murdering those who murdered them. Then, when he has to choose between fighting for the King of Poland or fighting for the local magnate based in Lithuania, who he actually also has fealty over because he's from that region, he chooses the magnate, who ends up signing for the Swedes, meaning that he has to fight for the Swedes, realistically. Kmita goes through a number of reckonings and personal religious awakenings. He finally has enough of being underneath the Radziwill yoke, which, spoiler alerts, we're talking about Radziwills here, and turns back to fighting for the King Kazimir specifically, and plays a massive role in the siege of Jasna Góra. He is a badass in the siege of Jasna Góra, and from there on in. He's brutal, cunning, and feared by everyone, basically. He does some sick, disgusting revenge, shit as well. When he does change back to fight for the king, he takes on a new name as well, named Babinich, because he fears his old name is so tainted due to, his past actions and also some lies that one of the Radziwills are passing around by him after he betrays the Radziwills. He would be hanged right there on the spot as a traitor because, yeah, he would. Kmita, to me, is honestly the symbolism that is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth as a whole throughout this novel. Undergoing so much injury, going through so many personal awakenings, understanding why he and who he is as a person, and what the nation is as a country. He certainly is a character that has the most impact in this novel. And, in the first book, I remember saying that a lot of characters are one-dimensional. Not anymore, especially not him. All right, any questions yet?
No, it was pretty interesting, though.
Let's chat briefly about Alexandra Bilovich. Actually, let's just briefly chat about all female characters in both these books so far. They are either peasant maids or hopelessly ridiculous royalty that are portrayed as damsels in distress. The only strong-willed person so far that I've seen so far is literally a witch. Like literally a witch in the first book. The only thing that they are strong-willed about otherwise, other than which, are their virtue, meaning that they are loyal to their husbands or husbands-to-be. Right? It's just like very one-dimensional and kind of like there's a complete lack of independent, strong female characters. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I need to point it out.
I mean, it's 19th century European writing, so like it's not surprising.
I mean, it kind of is in some ways, too, because there are strong characters throughout certain Russian novels, but I mean, again, what do you consider strong? But these just kind of lack it entirely. Yeah. There's a couple here and there that are portrayed as strong-willed, but once there's any person with a threat of violence, that doesn't occur anymore, right? Well, we talked about two new fictional characters. Let's talk about two real characters that are brought in that are new as well. The Radziwill cousins, Janusz and Bogusław. Now, we get that these two are cousins, right? The Radziwills are, however, we should talk about how they're probably one of the most important name in all of Lithuanian history when you refer to basically Lithuanian nobles in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Summarily, the Commonwealth was created when a Polish princess married a Lithuanian back in 1385, right? And the Radziwills were one of the nobilities who signed the union of the two Commonwealths together. Janusz is the noble and court chamberlain of Lithuania. Then he was a field hetman. Hetman here, guys, by the way, he's the commander of the army, or one of the armies. He was also, right?
Yeah.
He's a general.
Yeah, basically. It's like a medieval, like early medieval name, though. Like it's a very old name for like general.
Yeah.
I just think it's really cool.
He's also the voivode of Vilnius, right? So kind of important dude here. He's one of the people who sides with the Swedish king, and he's the person that Kmita swears fealty to during the party that left Kmita rather perplexed at what to do. So he basically just like joins Janusz because he has he just doesn't speak up and doesn't understand what's going on. In the book, both brothers are treated as sickly people. They just kind of are always sick. And Janusz even has a pathetic death I don't know if in real life, but in the book, he basically dies of an asthma attack. Spoiler, guys, sorry. However, he is portrayed as thinking he made the right choice for Lithuania and its people by siding with the Swedes. He constantly is battling himself after he makes the decision that this was the right choice. He also believed that the King of Sweden, when he believes the King of Sweden when he tells him that he's going to make a separate Lithuania and make him the king. So again, he's a symbol of the Schlata who thought he was going to hold onto his power afterwards and even gain more power if he joins Sweden, and is just wildly incorrect in his assumptions. Anything you want to bring up with Janusz? Do you know anything about him?
No. No, just I know the Radzivills are very, very influential family.
Yeah, there's a third cousin here too that actually sides with King Jan Kazimir that we won't talk about. There's so many Radzivills. We're just going to talk about these two. Boguslav is a different story altogether. He's an epic warrior who isn't afraid to play dirty at all. Boguslav is portrayed as somebody who basically never lives in Poland and travels throughout all of Europe just to fight wars. There's a story where he fights a mama bear with a spear and kills her and then kills the cub. You know, cool guy, which is really sad if you think about it, because why would you kill an innocent cub? This is Poland after all, and like us Slavs know how to keep a bear as a pet. Wojtek, the Iranian bear. I think to this day, Wojtek has the highest rank of all bears of all time.
Yeah, I guess so. Wojtek, I honestly can't think of another bear that has such a high. I mean, in terms of military accomplishments, I can't think of a single animal that's more badass than Wojtek, and there were a lot of badass animals. I mean, there was a dog in the Pacific that was running fucking shit throughout the island hopping campaigns, and still Wojtek in Monte Cassino carrying artillery on his back for his people is still
for to eat cigarettes and drink vodka.
Yeah,
it's my favorite.
Well, what he did in Monte Cassino, like it was honestly one of the hardest battles Americans fought during that war, and they gave up, and Polish army eventually took it, and part of it is because a bear was carrying artillery on his back to help out his platoon. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, this is World War II nerd shit. Yeah, I know, right? Like,
I mean, we know about a bear.
God, what was his rank again? It was colonel, I think, right?
I don't know. They retired him in something crazy.
Yeah, I mean, he deserved it, and you ended up in the Warsaw Zoo, and like people loved him. And like,
Edinburgh Zoo.
What?
Edinburgh Zoo.
Oh, Edinburgh Zoo.
Yeah, because they couldn't. The people who fought in the Polish army couldn't go back to Poland.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, you're right. My bad. Ugh. Whatever. World War II. Boguslav paints himself like a Frenchman, I think is literally the quote I read. Not a super important detail other than Henryk Sienkiewicz wanting to highlight that he did not follow Polish customs whatsoever. I mean, I think at this point in the era, the late 17th century, French people, men and women, both used a lot of makeup. I mean, I don't think that's controversial to say. Just look at what was happening underneath the Sun Kings bullshit, right? But he becomes the field hetman after his cousin dies and is the mortal enemy of our friend Kmita. But I won't spoil why they're enemies. You'll just have to read the 1,800-page novel. One thing that struck me was how multi-ethnic the armies on both sides were. The Swedes having commanders from Scotland, Prussia, Bohemia, just to name a few, while the Poles at one point have Muslim Tartars fighting for them. Henryk did a great job really portraying how complicated this war was and how many people truly were involved. And lastly, to end on a fun note that isn't Wojtek, the honestly awesome bear, I want to talk about the Górale, the Górals, or Highlanders if you anglicize the word.
It'd be like Hillers or something.
Yeah, Hillers, yeah. Or
Highlanders isn't a bad one.
No, I think Highlanders is a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
Are a Slavic ethnic group found in southern Poland, northern Slovakia, and northeastern Czechia, or Chechen Silesia today. They are mountain people, simply. and they play a huge role in sneaking the king back into Poland in this book, which sure is only a small portion of the second volume, but when I read it and I got involved knowing that they were just involved, I got very excited. The best way to describe them in the US of motherfucking A is that, well, they're West Virginians, right? They speak a different dialect that sounds like they're kind of drunk all the time. They devote themselves into religious beliefs.
I mean, they are kind of drunk all the time.
They are kind of drunk all the time, and off of like fucking yam shit, right?
Yeah, like berry shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Vodka mixed with like other whatever.
Yeah, yam milk, right? Yeah, and no, is it? No, it's goat milk.
Goat milk.
Yeah, excuse me. Yams are totally not there.
I figured you meant like beet. Something made out of beets or something,
no,
like fermented beet. Something.
Fermented beet shit. No, yeah. I was thinking of Mongolians for whatever reason, but whatever.
Yak milk.
Yak milk, yeah. And they kind of are like just left alone to live in the mountains, being simple mountain folk in their own culture, right?
Yeah.
Like they're cool people in some ways, and like I remember Dad taking us to that region of the country, and like a family stumbled upon during a hiking trail, and like they still in traditional dress basically, and Dad be like going up to have a conversation with them and coming back to us. It's like, I have no clue a word they just said. I have no idea. Yeah, so they still are a part of the culture to this day, and they're devoutly Catholic, at least in this book, and a lot of them still back in there. They love their king. They absolutely destroy.
Well, they were left alone basically for ever,
and they are more. They're more culturally with one another, even though there's 3 different nations separating them. They are people in the flatlands of Poland, right?
Yeah. I do have a kind of a sad story about the Górale. Not that sad, but just kind of shows how badass they were. So the leader of the central government in Poland, I think it's Rudolf Hess, during the Second World War, he was a monster, but besides that,
he was German. He was Polish.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
German.
He was a Nazi.
German Nazi. Rudolf Hess. I think it's that, and I might be wrong. He was enthralled with the Górale and wanted to like create its own separate kingdom, like country surrounding the Górale until they actively started to revolt. It was very, very much a badass moment of like, no, fuck you Nazis. We're not going to have anything to do with you type of thing. That's the type of people we're talking about, I guess. Just a pro.
Yeah, this is a pro-Górale podcast, that's for sure.
Yeah. Also anti-Nazi, but yeah.
Very much. No, us anti-Nazi? Holy shit. I did 2 parts on It Can't Happen Here. Nora was a great guest. So that's basically the podcast. I just wanted to end with the Górale. Before I get into plugs and sources, you have anything else you want to add? Yeah, well,
no, I have like. So was he more of a more kind of Jan Kazimir? I'm curious about that.
I mean, he portrays Jan Kazimir as like this figure that like didn't have a chance, but also like it's a pretty positive portrayal of Jan Kazimir in the book for sure. And realistically, like he almost portrays the Schlata as they should have had less power. It should have been more of an absolute monarchy constantly. It's very much like, well, if the Schlata just kept to themselves and Jan Kazimir had more power to dictate where military matters were going to be, as opposed to like, these nobles controlling their peasants in a way that they don't want to pay taxes and build an army, like we wouldn't have been in this place to begin with. It happened several times, and I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like, I don't know if that was going to happen or not. It is.
I mean, you would have had to purge a lot of nobles to do that.
Yeah, it's not necessarily historically accurate.
Correction, Rudolf Hess is not the guy. It's Hans Frank.
It's Hans Frank. Okay.
Frank. Sorry.
No worries. Glad we got it, because I'm sure somebody was pulling their hair out.
Yeah.
I'm going to plug my Patreon. That's Lost in the Library Podcast on Patreon. Also, any questions, please send it to me at lostinthelibrarypodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram. Again, Lost in the Library there. And I have a Substack where you can find my work at Fil Deptula. Just my name. Everything. I need to update everything, basically, except for the Instagram. So the sources, obviously, it's The Deluge by Henryk Sienkiewicz, translated by W.S. Knichik. with both volumes published by the Copernicus Society of America in 1991. I strongly recommend this version. I didn't read the other one that was published basically a few years after the original book was published in the late 1800s, but I think that W.S. Kunichik did a great job translating from like that era of Polish language to modern day English in the sense where it's very relatable. It's a really good read. It's really easy to read, as well as, honestly, W.S. Kunichik has a pretty wild story himself, and I'm looking forward to when I can read his trilogy, because he did a trilogy basically around the first half of the 20th century in Poland as well. I also used a number of historical references online to look up things like the Deluge, Truce of Andrusova, 30 Years' War, Gustava Adolphus, Truce of Altmark, the Truce of Stunsdorf, the Polish-Swedish Wars, Sarmatism, Charles X of Gustav, even though he was the fourth, the Radziwill family, Siege of Jasna Góra, and the Polish-Russian War of 1654 to 1667. That is a podcast, my brother. Brother! I can say that now without irony because fuck that guy. But otherwise, brother! Say brother with me.
Brother?
Okay, we'll end on that.
Okay.